most people's third lab. That's always a fun assignment for me. I get to learn lots of interesting things about my students, for those of you who did the lab. Okay, so so in hour one, we got our MongoDB set up. We got it running. We put some data in it. We're not going to do the exact same thing, but we're going to use our cloud service instead. So if you can just open up a browser tab to mlab.com. You may need to log in. Your account is free. So when you log in, here's kind of the landing page. And probably in your list of MongoDB deployments, you guys have nothing. Why? Because you have no databases set up, except for Chad. Okay, Chad, so what do we do? Where do we go here?
You want to go to the home page here? You want to create new?
All right, so we're going to click on Create New. Now, when I scroll down here, we've got different providers, Amazon, Google, Azure. And notice they're all asking me to pay. How do I get rid of that?
Single node.
So notice these are replica sets, meaning these auto scale. It will serve my MongoDB from multiple servers. Well, they're going to charge us for this option, but if we pick single node, notice it says these plans are perfect for development, testing, staging, or instances that don't require high availability. And they give us a sandbox, 0.5 gig of shared space on AWS. Cool. So just pick that, pick the sandbox, give your database a name. I'll call mine COMP2106, winter 2017. And I don't think the name has to be completely unique. It just has to be unique to you, I think. So if you all use the same name, I think it should still work. And then just click on Create New MongoDB Deployment. That's it. Click Create New. Pick single node. And then type in a name for the database and click the Submit button at the bottom. That's it. Now you've got a free mLab database. So now it will show up in your list of deployments. It's probably the only one you have. So when we're working with our local MongoDB, by default, there's no authentication required, right? We connected to it with no username or password. Obviously, that isn't going to work here. We're going to need credentials. So to manage our database, just click on it here. And we'll notice a few things here. Up at the top, it says if we want to connect from the Mongo shell, like we did with our local database, we can do it using that command. There's then this command. This is what we need in our node application. That's the connection string, and we'll just with placeholders for username and password. So we'll put that in our node file in a bit. So notice we have two warnings here. Our sandbox databases don't have redundancy. They're not for production. This is for testing or learning. That's fine. A DB user is required to connect to the database. To create one now, visit the Users tab and click Add Database User. So let's do that. So notice in collections, there are no collections here. We'll add a games collection in a minute. We'll put our games back in here. So click on Users, click Add Database User. This happens every semester. So here's how you save it. And yes, I'm going to broadcast it on YouTube. And if you go into my database and put crap in there, like someone did last semester, I will get you back. I did get her back for putting stuff in my database. Oh, it was no accident. But I am somewhat better with Photoshop than you give me credit for, and I can easily find your photos online. It's no problem. Okay. Users, you have to click Add Database User. So create a username, and then I'm going to show you how you should be storing your credentials for every database you ever make. Okay. So put in a password.
So we use the one for MongoDB, mLab, or just something different?
Sorry, I don't understand your question.
Oh, add database username.
You have to create a user account in your own database
Yeah.
with credentials, and we're going to use those credentials in our database connection string from our node application. So once you've created this, you need to go and make a text file. Put in all of the information about your database. Put in the password and also put in the host. How do we find the host? Well, it's right here in the Mongo panel. Your host is right here, ds something 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 .mlab.com with a port that they randomly assign. So that's your server address. I think I forgot my password already. Yes, I did, so I better delete that user. Do it again. So save that. What I will typically do is go in. So I'll just save it in my folder for this course, and I'll call it mLab access.txt. And I'll typically back these files up to the cloud. So if I lose my laptop or it suddenly stops working, I haven't lost all of my database credentials. So put it in a file. If you lose the credential, you'll have to come back to mLab and create a new credential for yourself. I have no access to yours, even though you all have access to mine. So we've got a user account. I've saved those credentials in a file, so if I forget them next week, I know where to get them. So now let's make our games collection. So we can just click on collections. We'll add a collection, call it games. So we now have a collection with no documents. We can also cap the size if we want. We can set a limit on it. We're not going to do that. So we have this empty collection. There are no documents here yet. Now, there's a bunch of different ways we could get our game documents in here. We could use the command prompt and do it. We can go into tools. If we had them in like a CSV file or a JSON file, we could actually just import it, which is kind of neat. Maybe we'll do that. Let's import it. That'll save us from. So let's go back here. Let's copy this JSON array for a minute. And I'll just open up, make a new file. We'll paste it in. First thing we have to do is we've got to get rid of these round brackets and semicolons at the end. And we can get rid of the db.books.insert. So we've got now, in order to do this, it's going to want double quotes around all of the properties, as well as around any text values. I probably should have done this in the first place. Whoops, and I'm in the wrong folder, aren't I? That was this morning, sorry. Sorry about that, I'll have to grab those again. Oh, I did use double quotes, good, it will be easier. So far we just have our data. Now, we need to put this whole thing inside of another set of curly brackets. So just an open curly bracket at the top. And we need a comma at the end of each array. Now it's properly formatted JSON. So one array that contains 3 subarrays. And we've got commas after the first game and second game. We'll save this file. Before we try and import it, we'll use a JSON validator to make sure that it's valid. And if it's valid, we should then be able to use the import utility on mLab. So I'll just save this file into my node folder. I'll just save it as games seed.json. Seed meaning populating some database with some initial data. Doesn't really matter what you call it, just give it a .json extension. And now to check this, I'll just copy everything. And let's go to jsonlint.com. We're going to use this site a lot through the course. Anybody used this site before, seen it? I think there's a link on Blackboard. So here we can just copy and paste any JSON, and it will tell us if it's valid. So I'll paste it in and validate. Oh. Interesting. Curious if we take out those brackets around it.
Square brackets in array.
It wants the whole thing in square brackets? Okay. So, whoops, we'll go back. We'll change that top level. Square brackets around the whole thing. Thanks, ASAT. So I'll just save that. JSON lint seems happy with it, gives us the green check mark, we're valid. So now let's try and import this file from mLab. If it doesn't work, we can always just copy and paste the stuff into mLab. But that's because we have 3 documents. We might have 3,000 documents, in which case copying and pasting is not quite so easy. So we'll go back. Let's choose oh, we have to do this from a command. I thought they had a simple browse and upload.
Yeah, what think those things are links?
I thought they were. Okay. All right, sorry. We'll do it this way. Okay. We'll go back to collections. Sorry. We'll click on games. and we'll click Add Document. We will just do a copy and paste. And then it gives us like a query window. So here's our little JSON array. So actually, I think we will put our curly braces back in. Sorry. I've changed my mind a few times here. So let's try it like this. Let's copy the whole thing. So we have curly braces around the whole thing. If we paste it and click create, we'll see what happens. If it doesn't work, we may have to try it one at a time. I think this should work. What kind of braces do we actually need? We'll try it with square brackets. Let's see if it created anything for us. Nope. Okay, here's my last attempt. I don't think this will work. We'll just do one at a time. So let's copy the first one with no comma. This worked this morning, so I'm confident it should work now. So we'll just try our first game. So that works. We finally have a document with an object ID. So let's copy the second one. So I just click the add document. We'll paste in our second game. And we can do our third one. So we have the same three documents now in our mLab DB. Sorry for making that much more painful than it needed to be. So we've got the same data online or local. We can use whichever one we want. Right, if we want to see this in a table view, it won't show it to us. It just shows us the JSON. Okay, so our database, we've got two databases set up. Our node application can work with either one of them. So what we want to do now is answer Devin's question.
Could the issue with like adding multiple ones and or editing in table view be that it already has an ID in each document?
It's a good question. I could only get it to run to do one at a time.
Okay, never mind. The original data we put in didn't have
Right.
IDs on it.
Right, it didn't have document IDs. So notice the MongoDB, the mLab one, just like our local one, it assigns those object ID values automatically. We don't have to set anything up. It's built right in. So what we want to do now is we want to take our little our Node Express application we were working with last week. We want to make a lesson 5 and we'll copy that code into lesson 5. And then we want to connect that application up here. So by the end of the day today, we can, at the very least, retrieve and display the game data in our Node application. And if we have time, we might even be able to do a form where we can add new games through our Node application and have them save to MongoDB. Okay. So if you don't have your lesson 4 part 2 from last week working, well, then you should have taken my lesson 4 part 2 off GitHub, because that's kind of where we're gonna work from. So I'm going to go and grab my lesson 4 part 2 and copy it. I'm going to paste it and rename it to lesson 5. So we'll work with this same application for the next quite a while, like the next 4 or 5 classes. We'll just keep adding on features. So there's I got my lesson 5. So this is exactly where we left off last week. So I've got my 2 command prompts running here. I'm going to close the Mongo command prompt. I don't need it anymore. I want this one because I still want my local MongoDB database running. So I'll leave the first one. I'll close this one. Notice it says 0 connections now open. That's fine. So now in my code editor, I want to open up the lesson 5 application so we can start adding the code to get it connected up to MongoDB. So here's kind of where we left it last week. This was what's on GitHub, and if you were in class and you followed along, then your application is probably similar to this. We created at the end a header and footer. We added Bootstrap CDN. We're going to make those local links today instead. It's more useful. So I'm going to open a new command prompt and go into my lesson 5 folder and get this running. I'll just change directories into the new lesson 5 folder I just built, and I'll use nodemon to get our Express application running. So this is an exact copy of where we left off a week ago. So I went into lesson 5 with CD and ran the nodemon command, which is installed globally. So now if I hit our Express server, here's how we left it last week. Right? We built our little nav bar. We built views for register and login. We had a header and footer. And we have a games page that is currently blank, but pretty soon is going to display our games documents from MongoDB. It also says lesson 4 on the homepage, which we'll get rid of soon. So things are running. As I said, you can grab my Git repository if yours is not working. If you had your lesson 4 working from last week, just make a copy of that and use that. I would rather that you are working with your own code. If you need to use mine, use mine. So we've kind of looked at a few of the simple CRUD commands already with Mongo, right? We did an insert, we did some inserts. Update is as simple as this. Cass, you asked about doing an update. If we wanted to do it in code, there's our code. Pretty simple. Update the document with that name and set that value, that field to that value. If we want to delete, we call remove. We pass in a JSON object that explains what we want to delete. So we've got MongoDB set up. We have our Node Express application set up. What we now need is to configure this interface that allows them to talk together. Okay. So we're going to use NPM for this. There are a number of libraries out there that allow Node and Mongo to talk to each other. The most common one is called Mongoose. There are other ones. There's MongoJS. There are a bunch of other libraries for connecting the two. This is kind of the equivalent in our PHP applications. We use the PDO library for connecting PHP and MySQL. In ASP.NET, we use the entity framework as the kind of tool, the interface between our C# and our SQL Server. So Mongoose is the equivalent. We have a quick look on NPM. We can see how obscenely popular Mongoose is. It's very mature. 370 releases they've done of the product and almost 1 million downloads a month. So we're going to want to install this in a minute through NPM, and it gives us some sample code so we can get an idea what this looks like. Require it, call connect, pass in the database connection string. Pretty simple. Now, the one thing that's different about using Mongoose, in the past when we've worked with C# and PHP, typically we didn't connect to the database until right before we worked with it, and then we immediately disconnected. The model's totally different with Mongoose. We actually will connect in our app.js when our application starts, and that connection actually stays open. Now, why can we do this? Well, because our MongoDB scales. So we don't have to worry that we have too many users and not enough connections. If we have too many users and we're on a paid cloud service, they'll just scale it and spin up more servers. So we can just connect one time and leave it open. And we don't run into the same kinds of timeout problems we have with other databases. So that's what our connection looks like. We're going to wind up building models, kind of like the entity framework built for us in C#. We're going to build these ourselves. And the cool thing is Mongoose has all of the built-in, just like our C# models automatically had built-in create, read, update, and delete, our Mongoose models do as well. So we don't have to write any of our own functions for interacting with our database, saving data, querying data. It's all built into the NPM package. So I do want to stop the server for a minute. So let's install Mongoose. Now, we are going to use Mongoose each week, but I don't want to install it globally because it's not a development tool. It's a package that's actually used at runtime in each application. So I want to explicitly install it locally for lesson 5 with ---- save. If you installed it globally, yes, it would work. So let's install Mongoose into our app. So Mongoose is going to help us structure our application with this MVC model. We've done the views and the controllers last week, but this week we need to add the model in so that our application can interface with our MongoDB. And it uses the same kind of simple commands that the Mongo language uses. Insert, find, remove, and update, as well as create. So really simple commands where we can pass JSON data around. So our connection is kind of simple. And then we'll look at building models. Now, so we're going to connect in our app.js as soon as things load. We could write our connection string directly in app.js. It's generally not a good idea. If you think about in our other classes, where did we store, typically where do we store the database connection string? Yeah, usually like in ASP.NET, it actually Visual Studio gives us a web.config file. We don't have one like that, but we're going to kind of make our own config file for any global variables like a connection string or anything else that should be available anywhere in our application. So let's make a new folder here. I'll right-click my lesson 5, make a new directory. I'll call the directory config. We're just going to set up a file in here that has an array of any global variables. So inside my config, I'll make a new JavaScript file, which I will call globals. You can call it anything you want. This is not a special name. I'm just trying to be descriptive. So what we're going to do here is create an array of global variables. Because this has to be public, we're going to export it. Right? That will make this public. So I'm going to set up, first I'm going to connect to my local MongoDB, then later I'll comment out that connection and I'll add the mLab connection instead. You can use either one. You don't have to connect to both. I'll show you both actually right now, and you can enable either one. For the local connection, here's the connection string, super easy. MongoDB, so that's the type of database, / server name / database name. Remember, local MongoDB doesn't require any authentication, so we don't even have to provide a username and password here. So there's my local MongoDB. So if I use this as my connection string, my application will connect to my local instance of MongoDB. I'll toggle them back and forth. If you want it to be live, I'll comment that out. If you want to use mLab, in db:, I'll come back to this. Let's go back to mLab. Scroll up. If we click on the name of our database here at the top, kind of right under the logo, it gives you the connection string right here to connect using a driver via the standard MongoDB URI. So right here, where I've highlighted in white, highlight that and copy it. And then paste that into as your DB value. And we just need to, there's a placeholder for username and password, right? It doesn't show us the username and password we created. So I'll copy that and put it inside of single quote. So this is mLab. Now, if I want to use this, I need to replace the DB user as well as replace the angled brackets. Put in your username and password that you created from mLab. If you've forgotten your credentials already, go to the text file you created where you saved the credentials. Right? Who's forgotten them already needs to look them up. Absolutely. See, aren't you glad I made you put them in a text file? Or otherwise you'd be back in mLab creating a new user account. So I can decide which database to connect to just by commenting out one line and uncommenting the other. So if I run it right now, I'm going to connect to mLab. If I want to connect, I'm going to connect locally first. So I'll comment my mLab connection string and keep it live. So you don't have to run both. Connect to whichever database you like. You just can't connect to the same one at the same time with the same variable name. So for starters, I'm going to use my local MongoDB. Pardon me?
So you can work with local and
Not easily, no. Okay, so our configuration is set up. This file's done. We may add some other, later on, we're going to work with this file. Later on in the course, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to add Facebook and GitHub logins. And in order to do that, we're going to have to provide credentials to Facebook. So we're going to store the Facebook keys and the GitHub keys in here as well. So we won't touch this file again for a few weeks, but we'll get to it probably in another month or so. We'll come back and add some more global variables. So I'll close all my other files. Let's open up app.js. And it doesn't really matter where in app.js we connect to our database. I'll do it right after we create the application. So first, we'll require our Mongoose package that we installed. So we're going to link to Mongoose. We're also going to link to our config file that we just made. You can specify the .js, but you don't have to. The .js is assumed that all our files are JS files. So now we can call, hang on, I just want to double check. We should be able to call the connect method. Bear with me. Whoops. Yeah, sorry. Mongoose.connect. Sorry, we can just call mongoose.connect. And then we pass in our database value from our config file. So it could be our local MongoDB, that could represent our mLab database, whichever connection string you've enabled. So once our app starts, it will automatically try to connect to the specified database right away. We'll try this out. I'm going to try connecting locally. Just kind of bring my command prompt. So here's my MongoDB command prompt. So we've just added lines 16, 17, and 18. So notice over here, it's telling me there's no current connections. MongoDB is active, but there's nothing there's no applications connected to it. Just bring up my other command prompt over here. So if I run nodemon and restart my Express server, we should suddenly see a message over on the left saying I now have one connection if we did it right. So I'll run nodemon again. Cool. My Express app is started on the right, and now my MongoDB recognizes that my Express app has an active connection. Okay. So database server on the left, web server on the right, talking together. If I want, I can stop it, and I'm now going to try connecting to mLab. Sure. If we want, yeah, here's the example right here. So it would look something like this. Okay. So you'd have to create a variable equal to your Mongoose connection, and on the once function, we can log it. Okay. Yeah, let's try that. That's a good suggestion. Then we can take a break. So yeah, so let's create, I'll do it this way. Let db equals mongoose.connection. And db.on once. That's a good idea. When our app launches, to make sure we are connected. Now, if it didn't connect, we'd actually get a connection failed error, but this is good as confirmation so that we know for sure we're connected. Oops. So I'm going to stop it and try it again. Hang on. Let's see. What did I do wrong? Whoop. This is db.once, and the function is open. So one time when the connection opens. There. Now it says connect. Restarted. It's connected to MongoDB. So I'll just scroll up. So there's all our new code right from the top, from lines 16 to 23. It reads our configuration variable. It connects and prints a message to the console if we get a successful connection. And we see connected to MongoDB down here. Now, I'm going to toggle mine for a minute. I'm connecting to my local MongoDB. I'm going to disable the local connection and connect to mLab instead. There's probably a number of you would prefer to connect to mLab instead. So I want to make sure we did that correctly as well. So we can see we're connected to our local MongoDB. We know it's running. We've got an active connection. So we'll try connecting to mLab. We'll just make sure it works, and then we'll take a break. So I'm going to go into globals, disable my local connection, enable my mLab connection. Try again. Okay, so here's what happens when it can't connect to the database. It'll tell you the error is typically at the top. So it's telling me authentication failed. I'm not connected. Maybe I do need, I didn't think I did, but maybe I do need these angled brackets around my username and password. Either that or I put in the wrong credential. Okay. Wrong credential again. Ah, wrong password. Good thing I had it in a file, right, Tyler? Now notice when I fix it, it doesn't do a restart because that happens as soon as it kicks off the application. So I actually have to stop it and start it. No angled brackets. Okay, so the problem wasn't the angled brackets. The problem was I had the wrong password. So now it's restarted, and now I'm connected to mLab instead. So we have the same collection with the same data in both databases, so it really doesn't matter which one I connect to. The advantage of using mLab is you don't need this second command prompt, right? So this one that's running my local MongoDB, I can come into class each week. If I'm going to use mLab, I don't need this one. I can just run my node application. We don't need the local instance of MongoDB. If you want to do it all locally, fine. Then you need to come into class and start your local MongoDB process every week to put your database, get your database up and running. So I'm probably just going to use mLab because I just love publishing my credentials on social media.
I'm guessing we should probably add the config directory to our git.config file as well.
Well, two options. You can either if the one problem is you can add it to git ignore, the problem is you can't deploy then, right? Because you have no database credentials in your application code. So if you're going to push any of this to Git now, you got to put it in private repositories, right? Because otherwise you are publishing your DB credential. So put it in a private repository. I wouldn't put it in git ignore because then you can't deploy your stuff. Okay. So that's pretty much all there is to it. These 6 lines, we're just, we're going to keep them in here. We're not going to really have to touch them moving forward. In the second half of the class, when you guys do your second assignment, you'll need those 6 lines in your other projects that work with database. And again, doesn't matter. You can connect locally or live, whatever you prefer. I'm just going to work live because it's easier. And now notice my command prompt has 0 connections open because I'm not connected to my local instance. I can even just blow this away now. If I shut it off and just nodemon is running, cool. Here's my app. It still runs. I don't need that other MongoDB command prompt running if I'm just going to use mLab. So use either one, whatever you prefer. No big deal. Does anybody have any questions before we take a break? Is there anything we did that didn't make any sense? I know probably a few people have errors. That's par for the course. But is there anything that really didn't make much sense to you? Sorry? Okay, let's take a 10-minute break here. So when we come back, our app is connected, but now we actually want to feed some of the data. So we want to reach into MongoDB, pull out the games, and render them on our games page. We're also going to move Bootstrap so that it's local, so that we get code hinting when we're using those classes in our HTML elements. So let's take 10 minutes here.